Okay, good morning, everyone. Just please stand by for one moment while everyone's still getting connected here, and we'll get the recording started. Oh, looks like we do have the recording started. Okay, well, it's 9:30 and looks like most everyone is here. We'll see if everyone's here. So good morning, I'm Alan Lilly, presiding hearing officer of the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. It's November 6th at 9:30 in the morning. Thank you all for accommodating our schedule. It turned out several of members of my staff and I had schedule conflicts that came up yesterday, so we appreciate your accommodating us in moving the schedule to, or moving this status conference to today. So I see everyone's names are listed here on the screen. Mr. Vanderlinden, I assume Mr. Wolbrandt, you are making a joint appearance the way you did last time. Is that correct?
Mr. Lilly, that is correct.
Yes. Okay, great. And then the only question I have is who is 530-542-7800? If you can identify yourself, my staff will put a name to your number.
This is Gary Kvistad for ID1.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Kvistad. And I think somebody and my staff has a way to change that so we can get your name. It just makes it easier for the recording if we have everybody's name. So
Sure.
I'm going to just go ahead and get started. I don't think this is going to take super long today, but it is important, and I appreciate you all taking the time to meet with me today. So I did send out a status conference order on October 2nd, and it directed the parties to do various things. The first item was to meet and confer with the other parties to discuss potential settlements, and I don't need to have any report on that. I don't know how much of that has happened, and it's really not for me to know the details of that, but I do just want to reiterate that I encourage all of you to continue to talk and to try to resolve issues as you can. I mean, there are a lot of times when issues don't get resolved simply because of lack of communication. And if communication can solve those problems, obviously that's good, and we can narrow the issues that we ultimately may have to go to a hearing on. So then the next deadline was October 19, with Solvang was to file a document describing its new amendments to the May 7, 2015 change petition. And I did receive a letter from Mr. Wolbrandt. Thank you very much, Mr. Wolbrandt, which has quite a bit of detail about the proposed project description, and then looks like either a map or an aerial photograph showing the potential locations of the new wells. So I'll just start with you, Mr. Wolbrandt. Does this now complete Solvang's update of the project description for this phase in the process?
This does not complete Solvang update. That is the project which we have now sent out to our consultants for proposals for both hydrologic update and CEQA update. And we're expecting proposals sometime in the next few weeks. And when we do, we're required to take those to the city council. We'll be taking those to the city council.
Okay. And that probably answers my next question, but I will ask it just to make sure. My order had directed that Solvang to file a status conference statement describing basically the hydrological CEQA and related environmental work that Solvang plans to do by October 26th. And I never received any status conference statement from you, Mr. Wolbrandt. What is the status of that?
As I noted in our October 9th.
Oh, and excuse me, Mr. Wolbrandt, but you're sort of breaking in and out. So just try to get a little closer to the computer, because we definitely want to hear every word you say.
Great. As I noted in our October 19th submittal, that is our project description now. for purposes both of CEQA and hydrologic analysis. And we have provided that to consultants. We haven't gotten proposals back from consultants, so I don't yet know exact times. And again, because that's probably going to cost somewhere well over $100,000, we're going to have to take that to the city council for its approval.
All right, so I understand that, and I used to represent local public agencies, and I understand the needs to get a board of directors, and in your case, city council approvals. But just in the future, I would appreciate it if I specify a deadline in an order. I would appreciate it if you would file something and say at least that I basically, sorry, I can't provide the status conference statement right now, and perhaps give a schedule for when you can. I would prefer you do that. I mean, it was maybe implicit in your October 19 letter, but I had asked for 2 separate filings and I only got 1. So again, please in the future, just try to help me check the boxes here so I can make sure we're keeping up on everything. And then, but then going forward, Mr. Wolbrandt, what is a reasonable time for you to go to the city council? First of all, to receive the proposals, go to the city council and get the city council's action on that, and then to file a status conference statement with my office that has the information that I had listed for the October 26th deadline. I'm going to specify a new deadline, and I want to make it one that you can meet. So what is a reasonable deadline?
Mr. Vander Linden is telling me that based upon what he's been told by the consultants, it will be sometime in late January when we can provide you with a report and schedule.
And does that mean by then you will have obtained your city council, I'll just say action, because you don't know whether or not it's going to be approval, but can the city council act by then?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm disappointed it's going to take that long. Well, maybe we should just ask Mr. Vander Linden since he's here. Is there any way that schedule can be expedited? Because that's basically 3 months from now.
Well, hi, Mr. Lilly.
Good morning.
Yeah, and I did want to just say, before I say anything else, I really appreciate how gentlemanly and polite and kind and respectful you are to everybody, and your efforts to solicit or promote cooperation and everything. So anyway, so I just say that to preface. So hopefully people won't take offense to what I have to say. But okay, so in our last conference, you asked us to do these additional studies and environmental work. So so shortly after that, I talked with our environmental consultant, and they said, well, the work that you're asking for is going to take about 8 months to complete. And so that's 8 months from the time our city council approves a contract amendment with them, and we give them the notice to proceed. So we've, shortly after our last conference, I contacted both of our consultants, 2 different consultants. One's, Stetson Engineering is doing the hydraulic analysis, and Meridian Consultants is our environmental consultant. Anyway, so I needed to update and work quite a bit on the project description, and I couldn't email them or even contact them for a proposal for rework until that was finished. And so I sent that to them as quickly as I could. I know you don't know much about Solvang, but I have a massive list of responsibilities. And in April, the city laid off a third of its staff. So I have additional responsibilities got added to me with fewer staff to actually accomplish things. But anyway, so I did that all as quickly as I possibly could. I need to give our consultants, at least 3 weeks or so to prepare a proposal to get back to us. Then once I get that back, I got to draft up staff reports, and then get on the city council's agenda schedule. And so the fastest we can get all that done is, it's probably going to go to our city council. Hopefully, if our consultants get back to us with proposals, which we really don't have control over, hopefully if they get back to us, by, let's say, before the end of November, then we can bring it to our city council in their first meeting, and then we'd be able to give the consultants notice to proceed in mid to late December, and report to you in January.
Okay.
Anyway, so a lot of not everything's fully within our control. The other thing I was just going to mention, maybe this is not the right time, but I think hopefully you can see, Mr. Lilly, with our revised project description, the city of Solvang, from our perspective, has made massive concessions, and over again in our efforts to negotiate with the other parties, we've made numerous concessions over and over and over again. And all the other protesting parties, well, with the exception of ID1, they have tried to compromise and meet us a little bit in the middle, but everybody else is just like, Solvang makes all these concessions and they don't budge on anything. They just ask for more. And what you're asking us to do, your job is to bring this to closure and wrap all this up. Now you've asked us to do these studies that are going to cost over $150,000 to the city and drag this process on for literally another year. So I don't get it. I just don't get it.
Okay, well, that was a lot of different comments, and I appreciate your candor. And I will just say there clearly are some disputes on substantive issues among the parties here, and that's fine. That's normal. This is California water. I wouldn't expect everything to just all work out. It doesn't usually. So I understand your frustration, but also I understand the frustration of the representatives of the other parties. That's just sort of the way it is when there are disputed issues. So let's sort of, I have to sort of put that aside, knowing that that's where we will go at the hearing. But I do want to say, at least in the appearances that I've been involved in, I think everyone has conducted themselves very professionally, and they've set forth their arguments. And there are disagreements, and I'll just say I understand everyone's frustrations, but the way for me to cut through that is to move it to a hearing. And then we'll have the evidence. Everyone can present their evidence and arguments. And then my staff and I will prepare a proposed order, and present that to the water board. And of course, all of you can comment on that before the water board, and then the water board will act. So that's, you all know that, but I'm just reminding you that's where we are. Of course, I like it if parties can reach agreement on disputed issues before we get to a hearing, because it makes the hearing go more efficiently, but I don't expect everything to be worked out, and that's okay. So I'll just say that I think that's sort of in response to what you were saying, Mr. van der Linden, and I just want to say I understand your frustrations, but I don't want to indicate that I think frustrations are all just justified on one side and not the other, because I think they're justified all around, and frankly, it's just the nature of the process. But having heard that, I think it does make sense for us to set another status conference for sometime in mid-January. And I know realistically, it just doesn't make sense to try to set something for the last half of December, because people want to take time off, and including my colleagues and I, and probably most of you. So I'm not going to do that. With the number of months we have in the time frame, we don't need to push it that hard. But I will set a status conference for probably the second or third week in January, and I do expect the city to go forward and to get the proposals received and hopefully approved by the city council, and then and to prepare, and that's the city council, and then for Mr. Wolbrandt to prepare an updated status conference statement. So that is what we will do on that. While we're on that though, there are a couple of other important matters that I want to talk about. I received two statements, one from Cal Fish and Wildlife and one from Cal Trout. They weren't required, but there certainly was nothing wrong with those being submitted. And to paraphrase, both of them raised some concerns about the scope of the environmental analysis and basically request that the environmental analysis address certain issues and be very thorough on those issues. And I probably haven't completely characterized that. And Ms. Murray and Ms. Hall, I'll give you a chance to comment on that in just a minute. But let me just say where I am on that, and then I'll ask for your comments and responses. But I want you to know what I'm thinking. I think, Ms. Murray in particular, you asked me to order the city to do certain studies. And I'd like your comments on that, because I don't know that I have the authority to order a party to do studies at this point. But I do want to say that first of all, I think it's very good that CDFW and Cal Trout have raised these issues now. That's good, and and of course, I hope the city will review those carefully, and will ask the city's consultants to address these issues and do the analysis. I mean, in some ways, I know Mr. Wolbrandt, Mr. Vanderlyn, you may be frustrated, but I think Cal Fish and Wildlife and Cal Trout did you a favor to express now what their concerns are, because it gives you a chance to have your technical people analyze them and address them. So just let me say one other thing, then we'll get to you, Mr. Vanderlyn. Don't worry. I'm going to let everyone have a chance to talk, but I want to just finish what I'm saying first. And what I'm saying is, I don't think I have the power to order the city, or frankly any other party, to do any certain studies. But of course, if the evidence that's presented at the hearing is not adequate to support a request for action, then the State Water Board cannot take the action. So I'll just say, I think for Solvang, you're on notice that Cal Fish and Wildlife and Cal Trout, and probably NIMS would agree, have raised these issues. And if you don't address them in your technical work that you present at the hearing, you know darn well they're going to raise the issues again at the hearing and say that the city has not met its burden of proof that's necessary before the Water Board can act on the city's change petition. So that's sort of my view of the context of where we are. Is the city's on notice of these concerns. It is the city's burden of proof, or it will be the city's burden of proof, to submit sufficient evidence at the hearing to support action by the Water Board on the change petition. And of course, the other parties can submit their evidence opposing the city's petition. So that's sort of a rambling, and I apologize if I rambled too much, but that's my rambling analysis of where we are now. And before we go back to you, Mr. Vanderlyn or Mr. Wolbrandt, I just, first of all, Ms. Murray, do you have anything you would like to say? I think your letter sets out your position pretty clearly, but is there anything you would like to say on this issue right now?
Well, thank you. Oh, is there an echo?
You're okay. Just stay close to the computer. I think these computers are voice activated.
Okay. our letter is detailed, and we saw that there was a window in that the request for proposal is out. We did want to let the city know what we believe is necessary for their burden of proof, and didn't want to wait until the hearing to do that, so that they could act on that while their request for proposal is out to consultants. And while it's unclear about whether, in my mind, whether you have the authority to order those studies, I thought it would be helpful to have this discussion at the status conference. And just as you did. And I think that you summarized it well, that we need to get this type of information done. And so we're putting the city on notice of what we believe they need to add to their request, or maybe it's already in there, but make sure is included in their request for proposal, their consultants.
Oh, okay, thank you. And just so we're clear, I'm not making any predeterminations on what's necessary or not necessary. I couldn't.
Right.
I mean, I'd have to have the evidence in front of me and the arguments from the parties before I can make any ruling on what I think is necessary for the burden of proof. So if I implied otherwise, I apologize. So Ms. Hall, good morning. I know the baby's just about on the way, but I'm glad you could join us this morning. Do you have anything you would like to add in addition to what's in your letter?
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. Well, I think our letter speaks for itself mostly, but I just kind of wanted to describe the context is that we were very much looking forward to the opportunity to confer with Solvang before the amended petition was submitted, just for efficiency purposes, if we could resolve any of these issues, going into that filing, but there wasn't enough time for us to confer within that period. So we just felt like it was wise to get some of these high level issues written down for their consideration for when, we would all have the time to address these issues. So, a handful of issues in consulting with our staff scientists, just really helping us get more information to determine the impacts of the project on Steelhead, because it is, it's a new project description. So even though this process has been going on for a while, in some ways we're back to the drawing board, and we just have some basic information that we need to understand to better assess if we feel that our concerns about impacts on public trust resources are resolved. And at this point, we feel we don't have enough information. So.
Okay, thank you. And before I circle back to the city, I'll just ask for comments from the other parties. So while we're on the fishery agencies and I'll say environmental organizations, Ms. Beal, is there anything you would like to add for National Marine Fisheries Service? And you have to go off mute, or at least somehow, I don't see a mute icon, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now that's good.
Did that work?
Yeah, you're sort of breaking up a little bit.
My screen's a little frozen.
There you go. Now it's good.
Okay. NIMS generally agrees and is supportive with the statements filed by CDFW and CalTrout, but we didn't feel we had anything sort of additional or different to add at this point, so we did not file anything separate, but again, are generally supportive of the contents of those statements.
Okay, thank you. And now let's go to the other parties. I see here we have, I'll just go in the order they're on my screen. So Ms. Esposito, I'm trying to remember, I apologize for not remembering who your client is, but why don't you tell me who your client is and if you have any comments you want to add.
Sure. I represent ID1 along with Mr. Kivistad, and I'll defer to him on any further comments.
Okay, so while we're on ID1, Mr. Kivistad, we can't see you, but I think if you go off mute, we'll be able to hear you. So tell us if you have any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. We do have a few comments. Obviously, the CEQA review issues and hydrologic studies, I think those have been addressed by the environmental agencies, and so I won't provide any further comment on that. One thing I would say in the letter, and I do appreciate the city making the efforts to provide some more specificity as to what their project description is, and I think that's a good step in the right direction. But we would like more specific language. It's kind of in the letter. It's kind of rambles along and describes some of the things. We would like to have the language in the petition itself amended to specifically tighten up what they're proposing. And there's some examples I'd like to give of things that they might consider addressing in a better, tighter project description. One would be in the LSL reach for wells 3A and 7. I think it would be very helpful to understand the quantity and diversion rate that they're proposing for that area, because that's a very critical area for ID1. They've indicated that they've got a trigger of 1.5 CFS at the LSL bridge. That's fine, but I want to confirm that that's year-round. We also they've indicated that once they drill their new wells downstream, that they are agreeing to abandon well 7A. We would also be interested in knowing, does that mean they are also going to abandon the diversion area above the Alisal Bridge, which would seem appropriate if they're not going to be diverting water anymore from upstream. They've indicated that they've got a destroyed well number 5. We'd like confirmation as to whether they ever intend to go back and pump from well 5 and rehabilitate it or not. The other thing that, in addition to the flows at the Alisal Bridge, we think it's important that they also look at monitoring surface water subflows levels and understanding that as a trigger in addition to the 1.5 CFS, especially in the critical time during the drier summer months, because there may be times when then that would be an important factor as opposed to just the 1.5 CFS. So with that, those are some of the things we'd like to see in their tightened up and more formal project description. We did have a question on their letter. The city's indicated that they have reduced, their request down to 1,368 acre feet annually, but we don't understand how that then interplays with their table on page 4 that indicates in the short term they're looking at diversions from the river of 300 acre feet annually, and later on a maximum diversion of 650, which is less than half of what they say they need. And I think it would be good to have some explanation as to how those numbers interrelate and why they're requesting so much if they don't intend to put that to beneficial use.
And I just have to say, Mr. Kvidstad, I was wondering that too, because the annual numbers in the table on page 4 are quite a bit lower than the 1368 maximum listed on page 3. So that certainly is a reasonable question. I'm sure the city can address it, but it is a reasonable question. So, okay, anything else? Sorry.
I think that's it for right now. Hopefully we can keep this process moving a little bit faster, but I would encourage everybody in the city in particular to let's get some of this work done so we can get answers and hopefully get issues resolved. Thank you.
Okay, so, and Mr. Kvidstad, I'm going to direct you in my next order, my order following the status conference, to send a letter to me with CCs to everybody else, of course, just laying out what you just said. I mean, you said it very clearly, but I think it's good to have it in writing. Frankly, it's a lot easier then for the city to process that. And, and again, I'm not saying that everything you're saying is correct or that they have to agree to it all, but it's just easier for everybody if that's in writing, and also obviously for them to work with their consultants on that. So Again, Miss Murray and Miss Hall just sort of did it on their own with their letters, even though I hadn't asked for them, which was fine. But now I'm going to ask you to do the same with a letter. It doesn't have to be super long, but I think that would be useful to just have that spelled out in writing.
That would be fine. We'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, and I know you've coordinated in the past with Alisal Ranch, and if you can do that and have one joint letter instead of two, that's fine. Or if not, then you can have separate letters. So
I think a joint letter from both ID1 and Alisal would be fine. But
okay,
I'll leave that to Alisal to confirm.
Okay, so with that, I believe Ms. Hastings, you are the lead attorney for Alisal. Is that correct?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. So do you have any comments you would like to add now?
No, thank you, Mr. Lilly. And following up on the Mr. Kvistad's last comments, yes, the Alisal will be happy to join in a letter with with ID1. More specifically, I think identifying some of the issues that we would like the city to consider. As Mr. Kvistad said appropriately, I think it's really about just tightening up that project description. While we absolutely appreciate that the city has had a master plan out on the street for some time, we all understand that master plans are larger than the specific change petition that the city has filed. And so again, really want to just zero in on some of the specifics. And as it relates to the Alisal Reach, I think some of the operational, coordinated operational issues are also important to articulate. So for example, we have been talking with the city for quite some time about our ability to coordinate our pumping, especially since the Alisal typically pumps at night. And so we appreciate the city's commitment to pumping during the daytime when the Alisal would not be. We think that's beneficial for everybody. But of course, we'll need to have some additional details about precisely how that's going to work so that we really do avoid any interference between pumping. One of the things I really do want to underscore that is very much appreciated by the Alisal, and we think it is a critical component to resolving the Alisal's protest, and that is the city's commitment to cease all pumping when water levels at the bridge fall to 1.5 CFS. So I did want the city to know that we very much appreciate those additional details in their proposal. And I think with that, again, we appreciate and will absolutely provide our further feedback in a writing submitted to you together with ID1. So thank you for providing us the opportunity to give you this additional feedback.
Okay, well, thank you for your comments. And again, you can see, of course, I like it when parties can resolve issues, and I think you are making some progress on that, at least on some of the issues. But the main goal here at this stage in my proceeding, and I think in the city's process, is to try to refine the project description as much as possible. To the extent that resolves, protest issues, that of course is good, but it's just going to be a lot more efficient for the city if its project description is as refined as possible. And also, as I mentioned before, for the hydrologic and environmental analyses to address issues to the extent the city thinks is appropriate that have been raised by the other parties. So with that, let me go on. I see here we have Steve listed on my screen by phone. I assume that's Mr. Torrigiani. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So first of all, I'm going to ask my staff to change Steve to Steve Torrigiani. I'm not sure why it picked up that way. That's a computer mystery to me. But do you have anything you'd like to add for the parent district at this point?
I don't have any additional thing to add by way of comments on behalf of the parent district at this time.
Okay, and so that's fine. And of course, if you want to submit a letter with additional comments regarding project description or environmental or hydrological analysis issues, you certainly will be welcome to do so.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, I don't know whether I've missed anybody. Is there anybody else who I have not called on who would like to say anything this morning? And we'll come back to the city. So Mr. Van der Linden and Mr. Wilbrandt, please be patient, but I just want to make sure I didn't miss anybody else. Okay, hearing none. So I will circle back. I know Mr. Van der Linden, you wanted to add some comments. At least I think I did I could see from your expression on the screen. And so do you or Mr. Wilbrandt have anything to add?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, I've not seen any letter from California Department of Fish and Wildlife or anything from Maggie Hall or Cal Trout. So I don't know. I'd never heard of any of that. So I need to get whatever we're willing to definitely review and consider having our consultant address whatever issues they have, but I've not seen any of that. So I need that information.
Okay, the proofs of service do indicate that copies were sent to Mr. Wilbrandt. And also we have posted them on our AHO FTP site. So
okay, yeah, Mr. Wilbrandt indicated he's received that and he'll forward it to me. So
okay,
fine.
good. Yeah.
So I would just say though, I hope that what they're requesting is not going to require a whole bunch of additional studies as part of our updating our EIR, our supplemental EIR, because that's just going to jack the cost up and up and up. And I don't know if the more expensive it gets, the the greater chance our city council's not going to want to do it. But anyway, we don't have endless resources. So then the other thing was I was going to respond to Gary Kivisted's comments. So number one, we very clearly stated that if the flow drops below 1.5 at the LSL bridge, we'll stop pumping.
Yeah,
yes,
I think that is pretty, excuse me, I think that is pretty clear
yeah.
in Mr. Wilbrandt's letter. And I think Mr. Kvidstad just wanted to kind of confirm that, but I don't think there's a big question about that.
Yes.
So anyway, thank you for the clarification.
So yes, the answer is yes on that. The other thing was, previously in our negotiations with ID1 and the LSL Ranch, we had been talking about the city wasn't going to stop pumping when at all times when the flow at the bridge got below 1.5, and we had this subsurface well level. There's one monitoring well that I think it's owned by ID1 or the LSL Ranch, but and so there was discussions about water level in that well, but that is completely irrelevant now because those levels won't ever be reached if there's flow of 1.5 or greater in the river. So we've self-imposed a greater restriction on ourselves by agreeing to shut our wells down when the flow gets below 1.5. So that trigger well level will never be reached. So it's irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant.
Well, and that's the exact sort of thing that you should have your consultants discuss in their environmental and hydrological analysis. I mean, even if it's obvious, sometimes having documentation of the obvious is useful. And I don't know, we need to get bogged down in these technical issues today, but
okay.
I'll just say, please have them describe that, and that's good.
Okay, because I don't believe it was even that came up after all the prior hydrologic studies, so it wasn't even something looked at previously, but we can comment on that in one of the studies. And then, yeah, so I think that was it, but anyway, so we'll look over, Mr. Wilbrandt will forward to me the information from Caltrout and California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we'll take that under consideration. So.
Okay. So Mr. Wilbrandt, do you have anything you want to add?
Mr. Lilly, thank you for this opportunity. I just want to note, we did spend a lot of time and provided what we thought was very significant detail in our revised description. We're being pushed, I think, very much in two very different directions, and I just want to note that again. We're being pushed to get environmental documentation and hydrologic analysis done extremely quickly, and then we're getting comment letters from agencies, in particular from California Fish and Wildlife, who I read at least some of it as calling for studies that I think could take years to do. And obviously, those are two very competing ideas that can't both be accomplished. So for the city's position, I appreciate you setting another status conference in January. We will be able to provide you all with the proposals that we're going to present to the city council. You all then will be able to look at what's going to get done over the several month period. And ultimately, you're going to get to see that material. To the extent that any of you would like to call me, please do. I'm happy to talk to any of you about anything that we can do to further hone the detail of the proposal, if that will cause parties to dismiss. Ultimately, the city's goal actually is to address the physical concerns we've heard about the city's water usage. And so that's the basis for our revised proposal.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I see the cameras going back to Mr. Vanderlyn. Is there something you want to add?
Yeah, I'm sorry. There was one other thing that Gary Kipstadt brought up that I wanted to comment on, and you, Mr. Lilly, said that you had a question about also. So when you're doing water supply planning, you have to account for a wide variety of climatic conditions and water supply conditions. So the city has basically three primary sources of water. We've spent $80 million to import state water. So that's one of our supply sources. Which is a backbreaking thing, by the way. I mean, I regularly get complaints about how high Solvang's water rates are to our customers to pay off the bonds and everything that the city had to secure to do that. But anyway, it's backbreaking. But anyway, so we have state water, we have what we call upland wells, and then our river wells. So yes, on average, we're going to take much less than the 1,368 acre feet per year. But that's on average when you look at a long-term average. But there are some years when Lake Achuma is going to be empty, and there's going to be a 7-year drought like we just had, and the groundwater table will be dropping, and we'll have to rely on, rain in Northern California and state water. Or there'll be other years where the state water allocation is really low, like in 2020. This year, the state water allocation was only 20%. So we're only getting 600 acre feet of state water. So in years when we're trying to manage our water resources between Northern California and state water and Central California, Santa Barbara County, Santa Ynez Valley, Santa Ynez River supplies. So in years when there's abundant state water, we will pump our river wells and our upland wells less. But in years where there's really low state water allocation, we are going to have to rely on our upland wells and river wells more. And so there will be times when we will need to pump that 1,368 acre feet per year. And the city is growing. I don't know if you know how familiar you are, Mr. Lilly, but the state is mandating these. They have these land use planning figures. There's what they call the RHNA, or the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, where the city is being required by state law to have zoning to allow for significant growth of the city. And there's the accessory dwelling unit laws, the ADU laws, that are allowing people to add granny units or second units to their properties to increase the housing in the state. And I'm the guy right now for the city that's responsible for trying to plan for that and supply the water for that. So so the main thing I'm trying to convey is that on average, we don't expect to take the 1,368, but there's definitely going to be years where we're going to need to pump that 1,368. But thank God it's not the 1,980 or the 2,400 or the 3,600 that our permit was originally issued for. So anyway, so that's the explanation. So the numbers we have in there are like in those tables are average, but knowing that swings drastically from year to year for each supply source. So we have to have that flexibility to be able to meet to have enough water to meet other state mandates on the city for housing and things like that. And the state's basically forcing the city to expand and grow and increase its water demand.
And I appreciate that explanation. I actually sort of figured that was the case. I do know something about how this business works, but that's fine. I appreciate the explanation. And I'll just say, I think this is exactly the sort of thing that the city should make sure to explain in the hydrological analysis and of course in the CEQA document that the city is going to prepare. And I'm sure you will, but normally hydrological analysis have an average year amount and a maximum year and a minimum year, and even can have listings of if there's a repeat of the historical hydrological period of record, here's what the variation would be. I mean, that's the way hydrological modeling is normally done. So I'm sure you'll explain that in more detail, and what you said certainly makes sense. So I'll just say I understand there's a tension here, not personal, but just different positions and different legal arguments, which is typical, between the push for more analysis, particularly from the resource agencies and Caltrout, and the city's concern about budgetary limitations and time limitations. And I'm certainly not in a position to resolve that today. I mean, I can't. I don't have anywhere near enough information to resolve that today. But I'll just say, Mr. Vanderlyn, and obviously Mr. Wolbrandt is an experienced and sophisticated attorney, and you should confer with him. And don't tell me about your attorney-client communications, obviously, but you confer with him on what is likely to be necessary for the city to meet its burden of proof here, because that's ultimately what is going to be the issue for me. Is what is the burden of proof, and has the city met it? And and we'll evaluate the evidence, and of course we'll accept arguments from the parties going forward. But we're not going to resolve it today.
Yeah. But well, if I could just comment, yeah. So we're agreeing to do this supplemental EIR and these additional analysis, but in my understanding, we've already met our burden of proof because the Lake Kachuma and the past settlements and everything, they're required to release water so that Solvang can pump our 1,360 acre feet per year without having any impacts to the steelhead. Or then
Okay,
I don't
well,
know.
so
I don't get it.
that's going way too far for today. That's certainly a hearing issue. And I don't want everyone else to have to respond to that. I'll just say we're nowhere near close to resolving that issue. That's certainly a substantive issue that if the parties haven't worked out their protests, that we will have to resolve at the hearing. And, and obviously, I'm not saying your arguments are wrong, Mr. van der Linden, but I suspect others would disagree. And that, as I said early on, that's why we have hearings. We have hearings so people can present their evidence and make their arguments. And then my office and I will evaluate them. So anyway, but you have a qualified attorney who can advise you on your strategy going forward as far as what level of detail to do in your analyses and what is likely to be necessary at the hearing. So I think we've probably covered that enough for today. So let me just say what my plan is. I have 3 dates I've sort of made notes for. The first is for people who want to submit additional comments on the proposed, the revised project description. We heard from Mr. Kvitstad and Ms. Hastings, and there may be others. So I'll put that deadline out. We're not in a super hurry for that, although I think it's good for you to get that so the city can provide that information to its consultants. So that'll be approximately 2 weeks from today. And then in early January, I will set a deadline for the city to provide and file a revised status conference statement, which will pretty much be requesting the information that was in the prior order that I'd requested for October 26th. And then, particularly the plans and the schedule. And then probably the 3rd week in January, I'll set a status conference and we'll go forward. So with that, are there any other questions or comments that anyone has this morning?
I do just have a clarifying question, Mr. Lilly.
Yes.
I think that I got this right, but just in terms of what we know about the city's plans for the analysis, it sounds like a supplemental EIR is planned, not an addendum. And that's currently estimated to take 8 months.
I don't know if Mr. Wolbrand is ready to respond to that today. That certainly is something I want in his status conference statement. Mr. Wolbrand, do you want to comment on that today?
Certainly, and that's one of our challenges. We've gone back to the environmental consultant with the information available, including comments we'd received so far in the revised project description. And our consultant is recommending that the city do a supplemental rather than an addendum. And that's the proposal that we're expecting to receive and that we will be taking to the city council. And there's been lots of discussion about burden of proof. I think that based on what I know at this point, I'm likely to recommend to the council that it does do that more detailed supplemental.
Okay, so again, that's we'll see what their written statement is, but that probably gives you a preliminary answer, Ms. Hall.
Thank you. And then in terms of any further proceedings before the water board, in terms of a hearing, that would only occur after the analysis is complete. Is that correct?
Unless somebody gives me an argument to the contrary, my intent is we would not have a hearing before my office until the city has certified its CEQA document. Okay. Just because then we don't have the issue of a moving project description, and also we have the benefit of the complete environmental analysis. So yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else for today, then we'll go ahead and sign off. And thank you all very much. Again, I do want to just reiterate, I appreciate how professional everyone is here. I know that there are some substantial areas of disagreement, and there may still be even when we get to a hearing. But I just want to thank you all for conducting yourselves professionally. I think it makes it better for all of us to have the proceeding work that way. And certainly makes it much more pleasant for me. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll wish you all a good weekend and we'll go ahead and sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly.